Hey, what is up guys, it is RB Hardware, and in today's video we're gonna build a mini gaming 1440p PC beast featuring the brand new Radeon RX 6700 XT graphics card. In this video I'm gonna run you guys through the entire build process, step by step how to put this PC build together. Then we're gonna test it out in 15 of the current most popular games, including ray tracing. We're gonna benchmark and measure the performance, not just in 1440p high settings where the GPU is meant for, but we're also gonna look at what kind of performance you can expect running your favorite game at 1080p at the highest possible graphics settings. In case you want to build this PC too, all PC parts I'm using are linked up down below. Now before we get into the video, hey, my name is Robin, and on this channel we benchmark and we build gaming PCs using the latest PC parts. And so if that is something you're interested in, smash the like button down below and hit the subscribe button and notification bell, and let me know what price target we should try and hit in future videos on the channel. Now speaking of pricing, this machine will cost you right around $1,300 give or take using the listed PC parts. Anyway, inside this machine, apart from the 6700 XT, we find a 5th gen 6-core Ryzen CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, as well as a lightning fast M.2 drive. Everything housed inside this tiny Fantex case. So let's get started with the base of today's build, the CPU, RAM and motherboard. And for today's build I ended up picking the Gigabyte Aorus B550i Pro AX, which is a tiny mini ITX board that comes loaded with heaps of nice features such as Bluetooth 5 and the latest AX Wi-Fi standard. You also find massive VRMs and heatsink to handle even the most badass Ryzen CPUs without running too hot. We obviously also find plenty of USB ports as well as some well needed addressable RGB. So time to install our processor, and for today's build I've gone for the Ryzen 5 5600X, coming in at $329. Now this is a 6-core CPU with 12 threads with the base clock at 3.7 and 4.6 GHz turbo. Having a look at the CPU performance shows that the Ryzen 5600X is currently one of the best CPUs for gaming, so picking up a 6-core CPU seems to be the perfect sweet spot between price and performance in 2021. Now as we can see, our motherboard comes with a retention frame pre-installed, but since we're gonna use a cooler that uses springs, we're gonna have to remove the retention frame from the motherboard. Now installing the processor in the socket is easy. First you wanna open the metal arm. Secondly, you wanna locate what's looking like a golden triangle on the processor, and a similar triangle can be found on the motherboard socket as well. And so what you wanna do is you simply wanna turn the CPU so that these true triangles match up. Then you simply drop the processor into the socket and gently move the metal arm all the way down until it locks in place, and you have successfully installed the CPU. A cooler comes included with the 5600X, which I typically like to use for our builds. However, for this PC, I highly recommend opting for something a little bit better, something that blows and dumps the air out of the back of the case rather than just having the air spinning around. Now the eSport 34 Duo from Arctic is therefore a match made in heaven for this particular build. This one's got a massive heatsink tower that comes with two 120 fans, and these are gonna be able to push a ton of hot air out of the back of the case. Now the cooler installment is pretty simple. First apply a little bit of the included thermal paste and position the heatsink over the CPU so that the 4 spring screws on the heatsink align with the 4 outer holes on the cooler. Then carefully secure the cooler using the 4 included thumb screws like this until you feel resistance. And that's it for now. We're gonna wait with the fans until we have successfully installed the board in our case. Moving on to system RAM, and we're gonna go with these black Corsair Vengeance kit coming in at around $85 with a rated speed of 3200 MHz. And with these we are hitting the so-called sweet spot for 5th gen Ryzen, and as we can see, a fast clock RAM kit can gain a bit of performance and a frame rate boost compared to a slower clock RAM kit. Pull back the toggle for both theme slots and simply plug them in just like so. With that done, let's go ahead and install our super speedy storage device with 500GB of storage, and in 2021 picking an M.2 drive over a traditional SSD is a no-brainer, as this unit is so much faster compared to a traditional SSD without costing that much more. So what we want to do is we want to locate the M.2 slot, which we find right here on the opposite side of where we installed our RAM and CPU. Now what you want to do is you want to loosen this tiny screw just like so, then gently slide the M.2 unit into the socket just like so. Finally take the little screw and hold it down and screw it down until it stops. And now we can go ahead and move our whole base of our build and install it in our case. And for today's build I ended up picking the Fantex Evolve ITX for around $80. There's a 140 fan that comes included, and this is configured to dump the air out of the back of the case. Now something to keep in mind with the smaller PC form factor is that they tend to run pretty hot. Therefore, in order to keep the system from not running too hot and prevent thermal throttling on the CPU and GPU, I highly recommend adding another fan at the front to help fix that issue. And by simply adding this 120mm fan and lower the power limit of the GPU by about 6% and adjust the GPU fan curve a bit in the Radeon software, I was able to lower the GPU temperature by about 8 to 10 degrees. Now, in order to get access to the interior of the case, all we need to do is undo these 4 thumb screws to remove the tempered glass side panel. And before we installing our motherboard, now it is time to install our PSU or power supply, and for today's build I ended up choosing the CX650M with modular cables coming in at around $80. That being said, I am demonstrating on the CB550, that's because I didn't have the CX650 at the studio while I was recording. Anyway, you want to make sure you got the fan facing downwards, then slide the PSU into place and secure it using the 4 included screws. And because of the limited space and to make the cable management a lot easier, I think it's a great idea to pre-route both the 24-pin motherboard connector plus the 8-pin CPU cable before we actually install the motherboard. So you want to route the 24-pin power cable through the hole on the right side, while this 8-pin cable should be routed through the hole at the top left side corner of the case. And now we can finally go ahead and move our motherboard assembly and install it in our case, and simply connect the cables before securing the board using the 4 included screws from Fantex. Now is a good time to connect the chassis cables that takes care of the front audio and USB. Let's start with USB 3, and this is what this cable looks like. The connector is located on the right side of the motherboard. Next in line we have this USB cable, and this one goes to a connector that is located down at the left side corner of the board. Lastly, we have the front panel connectors, which you find right below the 24-pin power connector. Time to install a graphics card, guys, and for today's build we find the Radeon RX 6700 XT, this particular model coming from Power Color. Based on the RDNA2 architecture, the Navi 22 based Radeon 6700 XT offers excellent 1440p gaming performance. Thanks to 12 gigs of VRAM, the card is good enough for 4K gaming as well, and I would say it will be at least a couple of years until we start seeing games start using up the 12GB buffer. $479 seemed like a decent price for the 6700 XT. However, the prices for GPUs have spiked through the roof recently, and this isn't just related to the 6700 XT but all GPUs on the market. It is an unfortunate time to be a PC gamer right now. now, and we certainly hope that the situation gets better any day now. Anyway, plug in the graphics card and take these two PCIe cables and plug it into our graphics card just like so. And what is left to do is to flip the case around, whack on the side panel, and we have officially completed our tiny $1300 gaming PC build. Let's fire up some games and let's look at what kind of performance we can expect. On your screen now we are looking at the performance numbers that I've gathered up from today's build, and I ended up running 15 games in both 1080p as well as 1440p resolution for 4K gaming. Guys, have a look at my previous RX 6700 PC build. Anyway, as we can see, yeah, the 6700 XT is powerful enough to run any game out there at 1080p at max settings. But yeah, 1440p is no problem either. Even with ray tracing turned on, we're seeing great numbers in Call of Duty Warzone. However, that all being said, in some games there is a clear performance penalty when turning on ray tracing, but we're gonna talk more about this in a second. Let's have a greater look at some of the games tested, and first up we have Horizon Zero Dawn, starting at 1080p, where I went for the ultimate quality preset. And this results in about 116 FPS. At 1440p, at the same graphics preset, we achieved around 87 FPS. Next up we have Death Stranding at 1080p max settings, which, yeah, as can be seen, runs fantastic with an average of 148 FPS. And at 1440p we saw 120 FPS on average, again using the highest setting offered by the game. Moving on to CSGO, and once again starting with 1080p, and here I'm going for competitive settings, and this results in about 450 FPS on average. Jumping to 1440p at the same graphic settings results in about 420 FPS. Doom Eternal is next, and here I'm opting for the Ultra Nightmare preset. Let's begin with 1080p, and this results in about 248 FPS. At 1440p we saw 166 FPS, again using the Ultra Nightmare preset. Moving on to Overwatch, and here I'm picking the epic settings, and this results in about 166 FPS on average. At 1440p we are still way above the magic 60 FPS mark. Valorant runs very smooth as well, with an average of 280 FPS, and if we look at the settings, I went for everything maxed out, running at 1080p. At 1440p, yeah, the numbers changed to 260 FPS on average. Cyberpunk 2077 is next up. Let's first take a look at 1080p at ultra settings. This results in 79 FPS on average, and stepping up to 1440p we saw 51 FPS. Now, as a bonus, here is a ray tracing comparison between AMD's latest GPUs stand against Nvidia's latest offerings, and as we can see, although AMD now offers ray tracing support on their GPUs, they are not delivering as smooth performance numbers at Team Green. And this is something to definitely take into consideration if ray tracing, yeah, is important to you. Again, all PC components can be found down below. Great news, we now have an official Discord server up and running, and if you want to become a part of the community, ask questions either to me or any of the awesome people on the channel, you definitely want to go ahead and join the Discord server. The link to the server can be found down below. In the meantime, watch either of these two videos, and I will see you guys in the next video.